here, which I'll share with you, that her inspiration, she's a teacher at the Oak Grove School, and her inspiration, her call to teaching was when she read the book Education and the Significance of Life. And I find that very impressive. She read it as a teenager, and I feel that that inspiration is still very much alive in her. She does retreats at the KFA on the East End. She hosts dialogues with the teachers here at the Oak Grove School. And I feel like, from what I know about her teaching, which is not a lot, but I've seen her classroom, it's very welcoming and beautiful, and like I wouldn't mind living there, you know, in the classroom kind of a thing. But that she really figured out that education and the significance of life are not a one or the other kind of choice. So she has worked in the elementary grades and the middle school grades, and now presently she will be the director of the high school. So right now she's going to give a talk entitled Discovering the Significance of True Learning in Our Lives. So please welcome Mary Kelley.
I am not Mary Kelley, but I need to help her. So that's good, right? That part.
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Mary Kelley, as you've heard. I'm a long-time, avid student of J. Krishnamurti's teachings of liberation from self-imposed ignorance. But I have to confess at once that I remain today a very unsophisticated and even frankly immature learner of life's full meaning and purpose, so that my being called up here to this podium before you now might seem utterly incongruous and disconcerting to me, were it not for the fact that I am at least certain that I can and would love to share with you my earnest conviction that life itself will teach us its true significance if we can only come together before it as humbly and reverently as we may be now here at the opening of this annual gathering of the KFA on the beautiful Oak Grove campus of Krishnamurti's only signature school in America. For education here at Oak Grove School is indeed held, at least speaking for myself, to be the very action and creative fulfillment of life. In my opening statement, I described Kay's teachings as being one of liberation from self-imposed ignorance. Now, what do I mean by that? An etymologist once explained to me that the original meaning of the word education may actually be something like ex-indoctrination, that is, inviting the student to abandon former beliefs or conclusions, thus releasing him or her from that commitment, so that they can be free to discover the truth for themselves, which is pretty much the opposite of what most people feel that education means in reality, probably due to their own unfortunate past experience of school. Whether that negative explanation of the definition of the word education is really the case or not, I think all of us may agree that it is close to what Kay himself understood it to signify, as summed up in his well-known expression, freedom from the known. So education should disabuse students of false or outmoded beliefs inculcated by careless elders, celebrity influencers, society, public opinion, governments and political parties, organized religion and tradition, but surely also, and perhaps more importantly, imposed by our own deeper psychological fallacies and ignorance, based on our conditioned selfish desires and deep-seated fear and even hatred. The revolutionary promise of education, then, may well be said to constitute the creative beauty of life, freed from the bondage of our own ignorance and self-limitation, to simply be what it truly is. This reminds me of a saying allegedly ascribed to the sculptor Michelangelo, accounting for how he was able to bring forth the masterful artworks that he produced. He explained that first, he saw the angelic figure within the marble rock, and then proceeded simply to carve away what was necessary to set the angel free from the material that hid it. Perhaps we could say that, in a sense, the teacher's role in assisting her students to realize their own truth, as it were, may be in some ways similar to that creative process suggested by the great artist, to somehow see the sacred capacity to learn which each human being possesses, and to invite students to free themselves from the conditioning and false pretenses that prevent true discovery through. But in order to remove those layers of illusion, one must first learn to see the false not as the true, as we believe it to be, but as what it is, the false, as Kay has pointed out. Because what we normally mean by perception is either physical or psychological, and both of those modes of perception are in fact always experienced as finite and conditioned, that is, distorted by our own limited personal perspectives. Whereas to rightly perceive with the eye of the heart the false as it truly is, as the false, is to learn something utterly new. That is, to see perfectly, for the first time, the truth as it is in reality. And to see the truth in that revolutionary way is to understand the whole significance of life, once and for all, in one eternal moment, forever. No doubt what I have just asserted may appear to many of you either as obviously absurd, a blatant misuse or deceptive use of words and faulty logic, or perhaps you'll prefer to simply express amazement or confusion as to precisely what such extravagant words could possibly mean, if anything. To this, I will merely point out that the same objection appears to apply to many of Krishnaji's most well-known cryptic and pithy sayings, such as, "The observer is the observed," "You are the world," "The first step is the last step," "The future is now," time is the enemy of man, or if you will, teaching is the greatest profession. And it seems to me that each of these memorable paradoxes could well be said to represent the very essence of Kay's revolutionary teaching of liberation. So I would suggest that rather than seeking to merely explain or explain away such challenging remarks, we should instead seriously meditate on their deep, abiding meaning. That is, to quietly imbibe their life-giving soul nourishment. I mention all this because it was actually in such very humble submission to quietude that I slowly began to realize how the only satisfying vocation for me would be a lifelong career dedicated to learning the truth of Kay's teachings by way of sharing that sacred activity with my fellow learners in the classroom of life. Now, if you'll indulge me for a few more minutes, I'd like to share here some of the phases through which I passed in my youth before finally arriving here at Oak Grove School. First, I must start with the most important factor, that beginning in my childhood, I regularly attended with my mother, Christine, elementary summer school classes that she offered to public school children in New Haven, Connecticut. And over the years, I actually learned a lot about classroom management and fun, creative activities that were engaging for young learners, so that I've always felt quite at home working in the classroom. It was also in witnessing my mother's strong work ethic, incredible stamina, and tireless dedication to her work with children, many of whom struggled greatly in the classroom setting, that revealed what a labor of love looked like in action. Then my father, who was a postdoctoral graduate fellow and later on a professor of comparative religious studies, was often sharing his love of Krishnamurti's teachings and Kay's background in theosophy with my mother and I. So that too became somehow familiar to me. It was especially throughout the long years of teenage rebellion where Kay's teachings penetrated my confusion and grounded me in a kind of clarity and learning that wasn't bound by time and was therefore relevant no matter what I was going through or how immature I still was in my development. In college, I inevitably elected to major in education, but I must admit that I was never entirely content with my lot until I was very fortunate to attend a summer program offered in this very room to explore the teachings of Krishnamurti's education and the significance of life. Of course, I found it positively exhilarating and life-changing to join together with other educators who are willing to at least consider learning and teaching as a twofold life mystery, and who felt vitally challenged to enter into the hidden reality of the pathless land of education. And from that moment, the die was cast for my life. What was left of my vocational studies was passed in some mainly uneventful graduate studies, followed by a transformative year abroad, working as a teacher's assistant at the KFI Valley School in Bangalore, India, where I was able to simultaneously study the teachings daily within the idyllic environment of the Adult Study Center. Upon my return to the States, I spent a few years teaching in a public elementary school and was once again immersed in the world of mainstream education, the likes of which left little to no space for deep inquiry or freedom from the known. On the contrary, I felt it my duty to do my utmost to teach my students to a standardized test, so that when I administered the umpteenth assessment to them, they wouldn't succumb to a nervous breakdown. Fortunately, this period of my teaching career was enlivened each summer by programs of re-envisioning education, also here in Ojai, in the Pine Cottage on the East End, and eventually I found my way to become a part of this wonderful learning community of Oak Grove School, the place in which I now get to live and learn daily, and I hope to be able to continue doing so for a long time yet to come. Over the course of the past decade, during which time I feel I have myself been enrolled at Oak Grove School as a student, I've come upon the following realization. The teachings show us that it is only divine love that can see the sacredness of the whole at once, truly. And it is only that holiness which has the power to transform the given what is into the right action of true creativity. And this we can witness in the natural living growth of life in the wide world around us, made up of human beings, whether familiar or foreign to us, animals, whether charming or terrifying, plants, beautiful or bothersome, and rocks and minerals, valuable or worthless. Any of these mortal creatures can bear witness to the divine love that we would contemplate, but Krishnamurti seemed to favor talking to us about the plant world, inviting us to sit under a favorite tree and talk to it, and listen for it to actually respond, or to carefully consider the humble little flower that has succeeded in poking its head up between the sidewalk pavements to bask in the sun for a brief day. In one of his talks, he asked if we have ever noticed how a dead animal by the side of the road looks so ghastly and awful, whereas a dead tree's branches, viewed as still reaching up to the skies, retains not only some of the original dignity, but also a certain unique beauty. Is it not because trees and flowers do not seek and require so much of life as we animals and humans do, chasing after fleeting things that we demand and usually not catching them, so that death can only be for us an inexplicable and unacceptable defeat and failure, something to avoid for as long as possible, and never to contemplate with open eyes. Since we do find death to be so utterly abhorrent, Kay often invokes the image of a simple flower, perhaps in order to help us face the unavoidable significance that death has in our lives. He references the flowering of the mind and heart and points to the necessity for pure observation to allow what is seen to flower, wither, and die of its own accord, thereby liberating us from our conditioning. Kay has said that the seeing once is the seed put in the earth that will flower. You probably can't see it, but that quote appears at the very top of this image. And that image in real life is just here. It's an old relic from that first summer course that I attended in this very room about 20 years ago at the beginning of my teaching career. This poster is what I made for a culminating project, highlighting some of my favorite quotes from the book, Education and the Significance of Life. Though it is quite faded now and very little improved in its enthusiasm and wisdom by time, I am pleased to share it with you because I actually found it quite ironic that I should be asked to speak at this gathering, the theme of which centers on the very book which was then and continues now to be so uniquely instructive in my life. This brings us now to the second phase of my presentation, where I will share with you some salient points from Krishnamurti's seminal work, Education and the Significance of Life, which galvanized me in my own life's work. I share this with you in the spirit of inquiry, where learning comes about naturally and effortlessly, as when two friends set about on an adventure of discovery together, not knowing what they will find, but knowing in their hearts that the journey itself is essential. I will use the table of contents as the framework for the presentation, and for the sake of time and in observance of your stamina in listening, I'll focus more on certain chapters than others, illuminating the recurring themes that thread their way through the tapestry of the entire book. In his first chapter, which is itself titled Education and the Significance of Life, Kay says that to find out what is right education, we will have to inquire into the whole significance of living. And he goes on to ask, now what is the significance of life? What are we living and struggling for? If we're being educated merely to achieve distinction, to get a better job, to be more efficient, to have wider domination over others, then our lives will be shallow and empty. Then we shall be contributing to the destruction and misery of the world. He also said that to understand life is to understand ourselves, and that is both the beginning and the end of education. So in order to approach this line of inquiry into the meaning of life, Kay turns our attention to that metaphor of a flower, as we are reminded that the educator and the student must flower in goodness together. And in order to discover what is good and right, each one needs to discover for themselves what is the truth. And in order to see the truth in its fullness, love must guide the seeing, so that nothing is left out. No aspect of what is seen is shielded from our gaze, and so that our direct relationship to what is can be realized. In chapter 1, Kay writes that education in the true sense is helping the individual to be mature and free, to flower greatly in love and goodness. While this may seem to be moving in a very utopian direction, what with the mention of love and flowery imagery, he goes on in this chapter to point out the futility of ideals and utopian thinking, saying, if we are fully aware of what is, we shall understand it and so be free of it. But to be aware of what we are, we must stop struggling after something which we are not. So rather than imagining some idealized version of reality, we are invited to remain with what is, so that what is seen might give way to right action. Action that does not come from thought, strategy, opinions, conclusions, or is in any way striving towards a fixed point. So how is the educator to convey to the student how to go about this flowering? In the humility of not knowing how to do it, this profound journey of discovery is shared between teacher and student. The teacher sees that they can only help in the way that a flower offers its perfume to anyone who might chance upon it. There can be no agenda, goal, or outcome in mind, and when those get in the way, as they often do, it is the educator's responsibility to see that that is going on, and the seeing will put those well-intentioned yet misguided thoughts in their right place. Chapter 2 brings us to the spirit of total responsibility that Kay demands of all educators, that they see their work as all-encompassing, not fragmented by what thought might determine as more important, possible, or worthwhile. He said that the right kind of education means the awakening of intelligence, the fostering of an integrated life, and that only such education can create a new culture and a peaceful world. Here we may gain some insight into how holistic the educator's call to action truly is. And just as thought begins to insert itself and suggests that this is far too much burden to carry, or tries to convince us of how virtually impossible this would be, there comes a benediction in the realization that all there is to do is discover what an integrated life is for oneself. And so, a lifelong journey of learning unfolds, which has no beginning and no end. He then goes on to share the liberating revelation, which couldn't be more annoying to the illusory self, when he writes, "What we must realize is that we are not conditioned by the environment, but we are the environment. We are not something apart from it." In other words, he has put it as, you are the world, and the world is you. And without your transformation, there can be no transformation for the world. So what does this mean for us today in a world where peace has so clearly not been given a chance? John Lennon really was onto something when he wrote, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." And how is peace given that chance? Well, obviously, all you need is love. But in all seriousness, it is once again essential in this journey we're taking together that it be love that sees what is going on in ourselves and therefore in the world, not thought and all its cunning ways of strategy, solution-making, justification, and condemnation. In order to truly see what we are daily doing to ourselves and each other, that pure love, which is not shackled to some false projection of the self, must remain with what is seen. And if love remains with what is, then action will flow from that seeing, which will neither compound nor exacerbate the current crisis. That action may take the form of silence, from which intelligence can respond. But one can be sure that it will not be reactive in nature, separative in intent, or self-righteous in spirit. Kay proposes that self-knowledge is the beginning of freedom, and it is only when we know ourselves that we can bring about order and peace. And so it must be in this same spirit of quietude, spaciousness, and stillness that we humbly learn to read the book of ourselves, not as an acquisition of identities, experiences, or conclusions, but as a revelation of immeasurable liberation. So the questions of how to awaken this intelligence or how to read the book of oneself are not to be taken up by thought, but must remain a line of inquiry, the mystery of which will inspire within us the impetus to find out. The unique challenge of the teachings is that, try as we might, they cannot be used as an authority to follow blindly, because they are like a compass, pointing our gaze towards truth. Or, if you will, an antidote which removes the illusory stupor of our misguided conditioning. Beyond that, though, there is no roadmap to follow, because after all, truth is a pathless land and must be discovered by each learner alone. The teachings show us the futility of looking to another for the answers, which can be very frustrating indeed, but only to that aspect of our being which insists on knowing and being right. This brings us to chapter 3 on intellect, authority, and intelligence. Kay saw that any form of imitation, blind following, or conformity was at the very root of the human problem. And so what the teachings invite us to do is come upon right action from moment to moment through the observation of what is, not as a fixed conclusion based in belief, experience, or opinion. He says that authority is created by our desire to be right, to be secure, to be comfortable, to have no conscious conflicts or disturbances. But nothing which results from fear can help us understand our problems, even though fear may take the form of respect and submission to the so-called wise. Those who have seen the futility of the conditioned approach to life, which involves choice, the endless pursuit for security, fear-based reactivity, and ultimately violence, will remain with that clarity and discover what is right action through the humility of not knowing, the honesty of seeing what we are doing to each other, and the courage to stand alone. And what is it that will grant us this clarity in action? I propose we approach this line of inquiry by identifying what will so obviously not bring about this clarity. It will not be that ambitious and aggressive aspect of our nature which strives to conquer all obstacles set in its path, nor will it be the vain, self-serving ego whose mission it is to be separate from anything distasteful. It will not be the hero complex within us whose aim is to save the day, nor the sentimental aspect of our being which tries to smooth over the rough edges of our raw existence. It will be love. Not my love or yours, simply love. Kay said that for the understanding of the total process of existence, there must be an integration of the mind and heart in action. Intelligence is not separate from love. So what does this mean for those who feel called to education? We have to discover the beneficent ways of creating a new environment. For environment can make the child a brute, an unfeeling specialist, or help him to become a sensitive, intelligent human being. And if we aren't convinced yet of the significance of coming upon this all-encompassing love, which will alone bring about sensitive awareness in our living, then he asks us the very practical questions of what value is knowledge if we continue in our confusion? What significance has technical and industrial capacity if we use it to destroy one another? What is the point of our existence if it leads to violence and utter misery? If education leads to war, if it teaches us to destroy or be destroyed, has it not utterly failed? So now, with that omniscient love, let's turn our attention to some of Kay's even more provocative statements from Chapter 4 on education and world peace. He said, "War is the spectacular and bloody projection of our everyday living, and that to understand our responsibility, there must be love in our hearts, not mere learning and knowledge. The greater our love, the deeper will be its significance or its influence on society. But we are all brains and no heart. We cultivate the intellect and despise humility. If we really loved our children, we would want to save and protect them. We would not let them be sacrificed in wars. What is of the essence here is that we do not make excuses for ourselves, but rather remain with this revelatory message, and in so doing, recognize where our true responsibility lies. For me, it lies in a commitment not to lie to myself or my fellow learners, not to separate myself from the atrocities of war which I daily perpetuate when I act from a place of self-serving aggrandizement, self-righteous knowing, or defensive reactivity. Kay begins this chapter on the school by writing, "It is only when we begin to understand the deep significance of human life that there can be true education. But to understand, the mind must intelligently free itself from the desire for reward, which breeds fear and conformity." He emphasizes that if we see our children as possessions, extensions of ourselves, or tools to achieve our ambitions, we will create an environment focused on self-interest rather than love. This confusion we tend to have between the care for our students that is rooted in idealistic thinking, self-interest, or ambition, versus that of love, which has no motive, is daily apparent to me in my work with parents, teachers, and students. Perhaps this is why Krishnamurti called what we are doing here at Oak Grove an experiment. He goes on to speak about how futile it is to focus on mass education, which only leads to conformity. On the contrary, he points out that it must take place with only the few who are sincerely dedicated to transforming their own minds and coming upon an integrated way of life. He ends this chapter by writing, "An educator is not merely a giver of information. He is one who points the way to wisdom, to truth. Truth is far more important than the teacher. Without the search for truth, society soon decays. To create a new society, each one of us has to be a true teacher, which means that we have to be both the pupil and the master. We have to educate ourselves." Kay begins this next chapter on parents and teachers by unapologetically writing that to educate the educator, that is, to have him understand himself, is one of the most difficult undertakings, because most of us are already crystallized within a system of thought or a pattern of action. That is why we teach our children what to think, not how to think. He goes on in this chapter to pose some very direct questions and challenges to parents, ones which I won't bring up here, but I encourage you to pursue in the book. What I will share with you is the challenge he proposes to those who would call themselves educators, like myself. He reminds us that the teacher must be constantly alert, intensely aware of his or her own thoughts and feelings, and notice the ways in which conditioning affects his behavior. He insists that out of this watchfulness comes intelligent action, so long as it is informed by the reflections perceived in the mirror of relationship to ourselves, each other, and the world. You can see my elementary teaching conditioning coming through in these slides. Kay goes on to explain that an educator who has discovered teaching as their vocation will never ask the question, how to be a good teacher, because that is approaching learning from the limited conditioning of the mind, which is seeking a fixed answer to rest in, an ideal to work towards, or is hoping to follow an established path to truth. This also points to why it is that resorting to methodology of any kind is not where the true art of teaching and learning lies. Rather, those of us who claim to be deeply interested in finding out what is right education will be galvanized by this guidance. If teaching is one's vocation, and if one perceives the grave importance of the right kind of education, one cannot help but be the right kind of educator. There is no need to follow any method. If one becomes aware that there can be peace and happiness for man only through right education, then one will naturally give one's whole life and interest to it. For this chapter, I will share a passage which leads into the final chapter on art, beauty, and creation. Krishnamurti said that to live creatively is to live in freedom, which is to be without fear. And there can be a state of creativeness only when the mind is not caught up in desire and the gratification of desire. It is only by watching our own hearts and minds with delicate attention that can unravel the hidden ways of our desire. The more thoughtful and affectionate we are, the less desire dominates the mind. And it is only when there is no love that sensation becomes a consuming problem. Here again, we are faced with the harsh reality that our preoccupation with satiating our constant desires is actually an indication that we don't understand love. And as we've come to understand from the previous chapters, without coming upon true love, how can we ever hope to teach anything other than our limited conditioning to our fellow learners? Kay ends this chapter with, that is why the major problem is not the pupil, but the educator. Our own hearts and minds must be cleansed if we are to be capable of educating others. At this point, we return from whence we came by invoking the metaphor of a flower, whose essence is so pure that any attempt to replicate it is merely a demonstration of the futility of imitation. What Kay proposes about true creation has always intrigued me, because like so many other unknowable aspects of living, he shatters the illusions which thought formulates in the attempt to define creativity, art, and beauty. This last chapter is full of stark reminders that any movement away from the observation of what is an escape. He points out that art, the creation of a painting, poem, or piece of music, if created as a means to escape from who or what we are, is not creativity at all. He demands of educators that they help the individuals to face their problems and not glorify the ways of escape, and that right education should help the individual understand and eliminate the conflict, for only then can this state of creativity come into being. He goes on in this chapter to say that art divorced from life has no great significance. When art is separate from our daily living, then there is a gap between our instinctual life and our efforts on canvas, in marble, or in words. Then art becomes merely an expression of our superficial desire to escape from the reality of what is. So after disillusioning us as to the real nature of creativity, Kay offers some consolation by reminding us that it is through the observation of what is that our minds are left empty and bare, and are given the spaciousness and silence necessary for anything new to be birthed into existence. He assures us that all we need to do is tend the soil within which the flowers of goodness and intelligence will naturally take root and grow from the very source of creativity, which is love. He reminds the ego in us that this self we protect with all our might is neither the author nor the master painter, not the musician or the sculptor, but the student, the humble learner, who through observation will learn to get out of his or her own way so that the true art of learning can take place within and therefore without. In closing, it seems to me that to dedicate one's life to the art of sensitive living and learning is all there truly is to do, and it will require all of our energy to do it. So let us all find out for ourselves what it is to be true artists of living and learning, because to do so is the very significance of life itself. Thank you. My understanding is that now we'll phase into a shared inquiry of sorts, so just give us a moment to set that up. I don't think so, not quite. Oh, yes. Is it okay to? Definitely in a moment of not knowing whether I should begin.
Yeah, they're on.
Totally comfortable with that. Okay, so my understanding is that this portion now involves my good friend and colleague Gianni Garubo, who happens to be our English teacher in the high school at Oak Grove and was himself, I do believe, a lifer, which means he went through all the years of Oak Grove as a student. And then also you've met John Duncan already, who has worked in the K world for quite some time. And so welcome both of you. Thank you for being up here with me. I think the first thing that we'll do, just because right now my mind is quite open to wherever we want to move, is to honor a question that has been posed online in response to my talk.
Yes. Hello, good morning, everyone. And I just would like to apologize in advance if you see me looking down at this pad a lot throughout. I just want to make sure that if we do get questions online, that we can incorporate them into this session. There's a question here that was something that I was thinking at the beginning of your talk, Mary, when you shared the Michelangelo quote about seeing the angel in the block of stone and sort of chipping away until the angel reveals itself. And I was curious about perhaps the subtle difference of chipping away to reveal what is, rather than the other approach of saying, I must chip away to make an angel that looks like these angels that I've seen before or that others have made. So in that vein, we did get a question online that goes, if Krishnamurti walked in right now and listened to how we're speaking about his teachings, would he say we are free of authority or that we've made him into one? And I thought that perhaps it seemed very relevant in our work at the school because often the students are very cognizant of that, right? And so I guess I would just put the question to you and also putting together that imagery of it's not that we're modeling an angel and we're all chipping away to create that angel, but what thoughts come up to you in that question about?
Well, in terms of the reference to discovering the angel within the rock, it seems to me that, again, the only way to talk about it is to talk about where it wouldn't come from. So it wouldn't come from a place of thought or idealistic, ambitious thinking in terms of what we want the student to be or believe even that they're necessarily capable of being. It's a process that does not involve thought. And it's also one that is not necessarily caught in time. So it isn't something that we would work on over time. Again, very contrary to what we normally talk about in a school where there's a gradual accumulation of knowledge in order to pass a test. And similarly to that point that is brought up regularly about turning Krishnamurti into an authority, that is again something that each one of us has to discover from moment to moment within ourselves. To make a claim that either he has become one or isn't one, it has almost no meaning whatsoever. We just have to find out what the truth that is revealed, how that guides us in our living. And that's a moment-to-moment discovery.
Our next question...
Wait, can I say something?
Please, John.
By the way, after several minutes of this, maybe 10 or 15 more, there's a microphone where you guys can ask questions. We're not giving preferential treatment to the streaming community, but I just wanted to throw out there that in my life, to understand authority, you have to understand authority. And if you understand authority, you neither want it to be it or you want it put upon you. I mean, that's what I've learned. One of the ways I learned that the interesting way, not necessarily the hard way, was I was a substitute teacher. And when you walk into a class as a substitute teacher, you have absolutely no authority. You have almost the opposite of whatever authority. And I found that to be much more interesting, despite the effort and the calories burned to try to get some kind of equilibrium. But then coming in with my thumb on the whole entire room. In other words, the freedom that they were given, for better or worse, was very interesting to both myself and to them in the end, because I was not an authority, except in very extreme cases of having to, remove them or something. But I was the one who allowed those things to be free and to go into it with them. So, as far as Krishnamurti goes, I think that's what he is doing. He's allowing us to go in and be free. And the teachings are in here, even though they seem like they're out there coming from him. So there's a slippery slope between being able to take that in and not have it be an authority, and being able to take it in and digest it, and the energy is now just energy. It's not Krishnamurti words, So that's my take on it.
This next question is perhaps a further exploration about education and living. It is, what is the balance between technical skill needed for survival and holistic understanding in real-world career paths?
Hopefully nothing in terms of the technical for where I come from. No, I'm just kidding.
I think part of what's important to consider, if I understood that question, or sort of what stood out to me, is it will always be the measurable, and perhaps one could also use the word technical aspect of our lives that will often gravitate toward and give energy and value to, because it has a value. It can be measured. It can be used to compare. It can be used to feel a sense of accomplishment. It's this other holistic aspect of living that is immeasurable, and therefore the self and thought will want little to nothing to do with it. And so it remains a mystery, and it remains something that, once again, we have to see the ways in which we're exerting energy, putting forth all this energy in the ways that are measurable, in the ways that are justified as being necessary for survival, necessary for making money and all the things, and see how that is crowding out the spaciousness to discover what it truly is to live an integrated life, a holistic life. That we will never know, but it is still the most important thing.
Do you feel like they're diametrically opposed?
I don't know if it's necessarily inherently that they're opposed. I teach the subject of English, and so in thinking about my working with adolescent students, it's, there's areas that are purely technical, where we go over the structure of how we write, the spelling, the grammar. But then when it comes to the ideas and it comes to what a student finds interesting, say when we read Hamlet together, there could be 18 of us in a room, and what speaks to a certain person might not be the same thing that speaks to everyone. So I do find that in the classroom there's this necessity, okay, well, we must learn how to source our quotes, and we have to learn to spell our words correctly and whatnot. But when it comes to the deeper understandings of what art points to and the expression that it gives, and what maybe what John alluded to earlier about it's connecting with something that's deeper inside of us. And so it is out there, but it's also in here as well. And of course, as an English teacher, that's always the most fulfilling part of the work for me, is to sit across from a student and get to draw out through questions what speaks to them in these works that we read together. Whereas I do feel the responsibility of spelling, grammar, structure, sourcing, all of those skills. The real moment where it starts to feel alive, where we're really sharing an exploration, comes in the discussion of the ideas and what grips a certain student, right? And I don't know how many of you have Hamlet on your mind, right? But some students, they think of Hamlet and they see the grief as just way too excessive, and it's difficult for them to connect with the depth of that grief. But then there are other students who have a real feeling for that grief, and it touches them deep down, and they choose to write their papers around that. So, I think that there is a balance between the technical skills and a sort of more holistic understanding, whereas the technical skills are something that I can sort of put down on a framework step by step. Okay, step 1, check this. Step 2, check that, right? But in terms of what is it in this work that you find beautiful and why do you find it beautiful, that's a lot more difficult to put into a step-by-step sort of process. And so I feel similarly this question of, well, what technical skills do we need to prepare students to have to go out and survive in our world, but also what, not skills, but what awareness perhaps is important to go out and live a life.
Well, I have Hamlet on my mind because, and maybe it relates to this question, because I feel that the to be or not to be soliloquy, is it called, appears on the surface to be about whether to commit suicide or not. But I believe it's equally workable if you put it in the terms of a psychological ending, the ending of the known. And it works beautifully, and all you have to do is look up 7 or 8 words you've never heard of, and then you figure it out. But like I had to do. But so relating to that question, if being a physicist has put so much of the known in your mind that you relate through it without even knowing it, then it's a problem. And for everyone, on top of that, the problem is the unknown. There's the rub. I have this. I'm a successful whatever I do. Do I have to give that up to be what? True to something deeper, or true to something that is readily apparent, to resolve conflict, whatever, not resolve, but to end conflict. And I don't think you have to, but it's probably more challenging when you're so identified as something, somebody, some title. That Krishnamurti, again, not to use him as an authority, just throwing those words out there so you can digest them and turn them into pure energy, often kind of espouse the virtues of a generalist over and above a specialist. But I'm not putting too fine a point on that.
I think we have to also be careful or notice when we identify something as a problem. Because one might say that we all have the problem of the self, the ego, but the moment we frame it as a problem, then that very same ego is trying to solve itself. And so it isn't, I might propose that we consider looking at it without the judgment of it being a problem to be solved, but simply the what is of our condition. So that we can really fully see it and not immediately turn away from it and try to strive in a different direction. So earlier there was I think you brought the question, are they separate, this technical learning and this wholeness? Of course they are not separate, because in fact nothing's separate.
Our next question is directly addressing to Mary. What would you say is the key difference between the way you taught in public school and the way you teach at Oak Grove?
Certainly the love was there through and through. The deep care for what I was charged with. However, I was very much distracted most of the time by other priorities, as I mentioned, like preparing my students to feel successful or confident to take a number of assessments. And so a lot of the time was spent preparing them for tests through rigorous lessons and pre-tests and just a lot of content that was gone through. There wasn't that spaciousness for me as a learner myself to consider, was this truly what I was meant to be doing? Was this truly benefiting the student? And it did become apparent after a few years that I could no longer participate in that rat race because it wasn't responsible. It didn't feel that I was learning myself, actually. I was stunted in my own growth as a learner. So what I feel I'm able to do at a place like Oak Grove, the mandate of which is to discover for ourselves what true learning is to really be a student, a learner myself, and to not be fooled as easily that I know it all, or should know it all.
Relating to this question, I went to public school my whole life in Michigan, and 12 years. And in that 12 years, one day in the 8th grade, for some reason, it's a class that was being team taught by 2 teachers, females. They brought in a Leo Biscaglia video for us to watch. And if you haven't heard don't know who that is, can't remember exactly who he is, but he gave talks about loving yourself, and it was very new, and this would have been like in the late 70s. And then at the end of his talk, people would come up to the podium and he would hug everybody. And I'm sitting there, we didn't know this was coming. I don't even know why they did it, because it was a one-off, and then it was never spoken of again. And I go, what is this? This feels different, you know? This is something I haven't seen before, and I'm very interested in it, you know? I want more of that. Or I didn't say it, that was all internalized. And my sense is that in your class and in Oak Grove or at Brockwood in general, that atmosphere at the very least is there every single day. And I would have enjoyed that. You know, I left school wanting to get away from where I was geographically, and then later I learned psychologically, because you can't just pull a geographic. And I, in a magical way, moved out to California and instantly met someone who was interested in Krishnamurti, and in like a year I was up here seeing him speak. So I followed an invisible thread and found that, but I don't know what it would have been like if I had it every single day. And I think that's at least the foundational benefit of the school. Yeah.
We do have more questions online, but I think we've done plenty. If anybody in the room has something, there's a microphone in the center here. You could come on up.
Does he have to go through all Einstein and everybody's previous research? Whereas further research is going on negating those principles which are very false, later on proved. Even the same thing is religion. What we are doing there is, a kid is there, 7 years old kid. You give him a toy, he plays with the toy. In that playing, his natural curiosity is there. By imparting theories, we are killing the curiosity. Instead of that, if he comes, you give him a project or give 7, 8 subjects and projects. Ask him to play around few times and see what is his interest. He learns not only his interest, he also will learn his natural curiosity comes into the play, brings the intelligence to play with him. No Albert Einstein. His curiosity in life and everything, they develop. That's what I think.
Thank you.
I remember reading Krishnamurti having said, the best thing you can do for a kid is to let him be a kid. And also he wasn't averse to letting someone stare out the window. It's an undefined and infinite gaze, as it were. And I think you're saying, Sita, is that to understand that and nurture that, even in areas of study, is, and I think that is, maybe, I can't speak to it directly, but maybe you guys can speak to that. Right?
He is also learning the participation. He is also learning the cooperation. If he doesn't know, he will go and ask somebody else. Right. How to do, I can do this. Both ways they help each other. So all that it comes, we don't have to segregate them with separate names. That's the learning for him and for us, teachers and students.
Thank you.
Hello. Probably the question to Mary or anybody else who can answer. That's a nice presentation, and I do see the job of the educator is very complex. My question is, for technical questions like what is a computer, you can answer. You can give a pretty straightforward answer because the answer is very structured. But if a kid poses a question like what is God, would you say, I don't know, I'm figuring that out myself, this is my journey, let's go together in the journey? Or would you give like more metaphysical answers? Probably that depends on the kid's age too. As a slightly follow-up question to that, even if you give an answer like, I don't know myself, like more humility, how do you prevent the grandparents or somebody else in society giving answers like, oh, God is this photo, like, go pray to that God, right? So, yeah, that's the question. I'm asking this because I have a 2-year-old twin daughters, so that might come my way pretty soon, so I just want to understand how can I approach that. Thank you.
I have something to respond, but perhaps Gianni too, you'd delve into those topics more with your high school students. I would imagine that the approach to responding to that question has everything to do with the spirit in which you engage in that inquiry. And if the humility of not knowing need not be an end, it will be felt if you truly are interested in going into that with the child at whatever age. Any answer, if given, because it feels as though it's a conclusion you've come upon, it should be stated as such, so it's seen for what it is, which is a conclusion or a belief or something you've been shown or taught that you yourself take to be close to the truth. But ultimately, it's the commitment to remain with the depth of that inquiry that will define sort of the outcome of it. The child will sense that your interest is not in satiating their desire for an answer, but rather honoring the sacredness of the question itself.
Yeah, please.
Don't you think that we should look at our own conditioning?
Absolutely.
Because, the question is there a God or not? Somebody is going to ask you. But what is the conditioning I have?
Sure.
If I don't understand my conditioning, I'm not even prepared to face the question.
Absolutely. Yes. Being in observation of our conditioning is absolutely essential in that. And so a response to that question might be one that you've heard Kay use many times: find out. We can look at it together, we can inquire into it together, but ultimately it's for you to find out.
In another example, in the English classroom, right, I see a lot of similarities to this question that we've just been discussing in just how we approach works of literature and we're reading together. And we sort of share in this practice of, if we begin our group discussion with the conclusions about how we feel about the reading and with all of our interpretations, oh, this is it saying this, and I think it couldn't be otherwise, I tried to open the window and to show the students that they begin to get a feeling that if we approach our discussions around Hamlet without any of the conclusions that may have bubbled up as we've all been reading and writing about it along the way, that perhaps we can all together discover something new or something that we may not have had access to if we had just stuck very staunchly to the conclusions that we all had when we were reading the book by ourselves. And so I hope in that way, that practice in the English classroom can maybe just get students to feel more comfortable with holding an open question and seeing what arises from that.
Oh. Are you saying we're done? Okay, one last question.
It's a simple question, I hope. What is knowledge? I know we use words, education and knowledge, in our presentation by you, Mary. More importantly, what is not knowledge is what I'm trying to find out. We have a definition of what it is, but I think it's more to it. That's really what I want to find out from you all.
I don't know.
I do.
Okay.
And the fact that I don't know is the most exciting, exhilarating, inspiring thing about this endlessness to learning.
Maybe after you finished your thought.
Bachelor number 2 was. You know the distinction of learning with accumulation and learning without accumulation. You've heard those terms, right? Learning with accumulation is going from algebra to calculus to trigonometry and so forth. So the question then becomes, what is learning without accumulation? So not what knowledge is, because knowledge, however limited, is very useful in those terms. What does it mean to learn without, what does learning without accumulation mean? You're not doing it in that sense. You know, you're not starting with your prior knowledge and making an effort to find out something new from that. It's very passive in that way. So that opens up a whole large, you know, inquiry, which we don't apparently have the time for right now, but I think it's a good question.
So knowledge is not necessarily the outcome of education. Is that correct?
And not, certainly not in the way that Krishnamurti proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're done, but I would like to present a few sentences that will serve as sort of a bridge from Mary's talk to the next talk, which will be given by Connie, maybe? Yes. Connie Jones, and it's at 1:30, I believe, after lunch, so I encourage you all to attend. So, what I have written here, which I did not write, and I don't know if we covered, but hopefully it'll make sense. If freedom is the ground of learning, and if most of us rarely touch that freedom, we must ask, what is conditioning? How deep does it run? And is there an individual who stands apart from conditioning and could simply step outside it? Or is the individual, quote unquote, itself conditioning's product? So, that's it. Thanks for
Thank you.
listening and participating in listening. Good job.